Think you know Henry VIII? Think again. Most people remember him as the English king with 6 unlucky wives and the guy who broke away from the Catholic Church. But the real story of Henry VIII is far more disturbing, and honestly, more unbelievable than most school books will ever tell you. This wasn't just a king, he was a walking contradiction. Charming and cultured one moment, bloodthirsty and unhinged the next. He was a man so dangerously overweight that he needed machines. Yes, actual mechanical devices. To hoist him up and move him around his palace like some monstrous piece of furniture. By the end of his life, Henry reportedly had a waistline of over 54 inches and weighed close to 400 pounds. His obesity was so severe that it caused his legs to swell and ulcerate. The sores on his legs were so gruesome and infected that the stench was unbearable. Courtiers described the smell as fetid and putrid. People standing nearby would gag or suddenly excuse themselves. Doctors would try to drain the pus from his legs daily, sometimes using red-hot irons, but nothing worked. And yet, he ruled with a godlike ego, convinced he was chosen by divine right. He consumed around 5,000 calories a day, feasting on entire roasted animals. Endless servings of meat, pies, and goblets of wine. And still, he fancied himself an athlete. He loved jousting, until a catastrophic accident in 1536 knocked him unconscious for hours. Many historians now believe that head injury changed him forever. After that, Henry became increasingly paranoid, erratic, and violent. He went from a Renaissance prince to a ruthless tyrant who executed close advisors and former friends on a whim. His court was soaked in fear. Even Thomas More, once his closest confidant, wasn't safe. He was beheaded for refusing to recognize Henry as supreme head of the church. And Anna Boleyn, he had her killed after accusing her of adultery, incest, and witchcraft, charges many now believe were entirely fabricated. And when Henry finally died in 1547, his grotesquely bloated corpse couldn't even contain itself. Left too long before burial, his body literally burst open in its lead coffin, oozing out onto the floor in a horrific putrid mess. Dogs were said to lick the remains. This is not just the story of a king with a bad temper. This is the story of a man so bizarre, paranoid, and cruel, he makes characters from Game of Thrones look tame. A man who reshaped religion, rewrote laws, and ruled with such force that even centuries later, we're still haunted by his legend. By the time Henry VIII reached the end of his life, his health had utterly disintegrated. He was nearly 400 pounds with a 54-inch waist, size so extreme, it was wider than the average adult, was tall in Tudor England. His once mighty legs were now grotesquely swollen, covered in oozing ulcers the size of fists, constantly leaking pus, blood, and decaying flesh. These gaping wounds stank so horribly that courtiers claimed the stench could reach you from 3 rooms away. Some even believed his smell was so vile it could cause nausea or fainting. Nobles entering his chambers often clutched lavender-soaked handkerchiefs to their faces, and some reportedly vomited from the odor. For the unfortunate servants assigned to help him dress, it was pure misery. Drawing straws to determine who had to approach him became a daily ritual. Because getting close to the king wasn't just unpleasant, it felt like a punishment. The padded clothes he wore to hide his swollen limbs often became soaked with fluid, and it could take multiple attendants just to haul him out of bed. Using mechanical pulleys custom-built to support his immense weight. And this wasn't just about obesity. Henry's unraveling began in 1536, when a catastrophic jousting accident left him unconscious for 2 hours. His horse had fallen on top of him, and the impact crushed his leg and possibly damaged his skull. Afterward, people whispered that something in him snapped. The charming, athletic king once adored for his wit and musical talent became paranoid, unpredictable, and vicious. Modern experts believe that traumatic brain injury may have permanently altered his brain. Some even suggest he had Cushing's syndrome or untreated diabetes, which would explain his rapid physical decline, emotional volatility, and those never-healing leg ulcers. His condition became so degrading, he couldn't even control his bowels. Special padded chairs had to be carried wherever he went, in case he had an accident. And accidents were frequent. Servants discreetly followed him with linen sheets, cushions, and even portable chamber pots. Yet no one dared speak of his condition openly. In Henry's court, mentioning the king's health too bluntly could cost you your life. Physicians had to walk a tightrope, pretending things weren't as bad as they clearly were. Even as he neared death, Henry continued to sign death warrants and marry wives. His power still absolute, even if his body was falling apart. Some said it was like watching a decaying god, a monarch rotting from the inside. Too dangerous to challenge, too monstrous to pity. In his final years, Henry became a prisoner in his own bloated body. Angry at everyone and everything, yet surrounded by trembling servants too terrified to tell the truth. He had once been Europe's golden prince. Now, he was a wheezing shadow of his former self, a dying titan whose stench haunted the palace halls long after he was gone. You've probably heard the basics. Henry VIII had 6 wives and executed 2 of them, but that barely scratches the surface. The real story is much darker. It's a tale of psychological torment, manipulation, and cold-blooded cruelty. Each of these women was trapped in a nightmare, and Henry was the monster pulling every string. Take Anne Boleyn. Most people know she was executed, but few realize just how twisted her final days were. Before her own death, Henry forced her to watch the executions of 5 men falsely accused of being her lovers. One of them her own brother, George Boleyn. The trials were a mockery of justice, based on fabricated evidence and court gossip. Anne was made to stand helpless, knowing the charges were lies, yet understanding she would be next. Even the swordsman brought from France to behead her, a supposed mercy, was part of the spectacle. Henry didn't want a messy axe job. He wanted something dramatic, chillingly precise, a clean end to the woman he once rewrote the church for. Then there was Catherine Howard. She was just a teenager, barely 16, when she married the bloated, aging king. Henry was in his 50s by then, severely obese, with a leg ulcer so infected it oozed pus and stank so badly courtiers gagged in his presence. When he discovered she'd had romantic encounters before they met, he flew into a jealous rage. But instead of simply ending the marriage, he passed a new law, making it treason to conceal past relationships before marrying the king. That's right, he changed the legal system to make her execution justifiable. Catherine wasn't even allowed to speak with her family before she was taken to the Tower. And her last words? Did I die a queen? But I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper, the man she loved. Heartbreaking. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, endured decades of humiliation. Once his loyal queen, she was discarded after failing to give Henry a male heir. But instead of a clean break, Henry exiled her to cold, crumbling castles, and refused her any contact with their daughter, Mary. He had her monitored constantly. Even her letters were intercepted or ignored. At one point, she was so ill and weak she couldn't stand, yet Henry wouldn't let her be comforted by her child. And as she died, he spread rumors that she had gone mad, a tactic to justify his cruelty. Jane Seymour is often painted as the lucky one because she gave Henry his long-desired son and died of natural causes. But lucky is a stretch. She died of postnatal complications just 12 days after giving birth to Edward. And what did Henry do while mourning? Wore black. For a while, but just 9 days later, he was already planning his next marriage. Jane's reward for delivering the heir? A painful death and being replaced in less than 2 weeks. Anne of Cleves may have survived Henry, but only by surrendering completely. Henry was repulsed by her appearance and called her the Flanders mare. Their marriage was never consummated, humiliated, and agreed to an annulment, just to avoid the fate of her predecessors. In return, Henry gave her a generous settlement, but only on the condition that she publicly praised his generosity and denied the marriage had ever truly existed. She lived as his beloved sister, always knowing she had narrowly escaped death. She spent the rest of her life alone. And then there's the bigger picture. These women had no real options. Henry wasn't just a king. He was judge, jury, and executioner. Divorce wasn't on the table unless he initiated it. If any of them tried to leave him, they risked execution, not just for themselves, but possibly for their families too. Their lives were pawns in his quest for a male heir, trapped in a bloody game of power, vanity, and obsession. And as for Henry himself, in his final years he was grotesquely obese, over 400 pounds, riddled with gout and ulcers, unable to walk without mechanical contraptions. He was so paranoid he had 70 rooms in his palaces locked from the inside, and often slept in armor for fear of assassination. Yet even at his most monstrous, courtiers still fawned over him. He had become the embodiment of unchecked power, delusional, dangerous, and utterly untouchable. Henry VIII wasn't just famous for being fat, he was legendary for how relentlessly he devoured food. The man consumed an estimated 5,000 calories a day, more than double what a healthy adult needs. For someone who could barely walk due to festering leg wounds and morbid obesity, it was a slow-motion self-destruction disguised as royal grandeur. His banquets were spectacles. Whole roasted pigs, entire chickens, exotic fish, fruit from imported orchards, and endless bread, all drowned in wine and ale. But to Henry, food wasn't just nourishment, it was theater. His kitchens prepared over 800 dishes daily, managed by more than 200 staff members working non-stop. Some dishes arrived in sugar sculptures or edible gold, and every bite was shadowed by fear, terrified of being poisoned. Henry made his food tasters sample everything, then wait 30 minutes to make sure they didn't drop dead. Meals could stretch for 4 hours. Courtiers stood silently, watching as he slowly gorged himself in a room heavy with the smell of meat, sweat, and the sour stench of his infected leg. Foreign guests often avoided dinners entirely just to escape the unbearable odor. Henry believed food had mystical power. Swans made him feel regal. Venison, he thought, sharpened his hunting instincts. Oysters were his aphrodisiac of choice, though by the end of his life, he was likely impotent. He banned basic foods like turnips and barley for being too common, even though they were far healthier than the sugar-drenched meats he craved. By his final years, Henry weighed over 400 pounds. He had to be hoisted onto his horse with a pulley system. Chairs were reinforced, toilet seats widened. His eating wasn't just excessive, it was symbolic. Every bite reminded everyone watching that he was the king, even as his own body fell apart. Henry VIII trusted no one, not his ministers, not his guards, not even his own blood. Each night, he slept with loaded pistols beside his bed and razor-sharp daggers hidden under his pillows, paranoid that even sleep might leave him vulnerable. Armed guards stood watch inside his chamber, silent and stone-faced, while others patrolled the hallways beyond, but that wasn't enough for him. His palaces were fortified like war zones, designed with hidden doors, secret passageways, escape tunnels under the floors, and narrow peepholes drilled into the walls, all so Henry could vanish or eavesdrop at a moment's notice. He didn't just fear betrayal, he expected it. And the wildest part, Henry didn't even trust the people meant to protect him from betrayal. He assigned spies to monitor his own spies, creating a web of mutual suspicion so thick that no one could speak freely without fear of the axe. The palace was a theater of fear, where a single misplaced word could mean arrest or worse. Men and women were thrown into the Tower of London, not for crimes they had committed, but for offenses Henry imagined in dreams or sudden bursts of delusion. People lost their lives because the king thought they might be thinking treason. Henry's paranoia didn't stop at his court. He suspected his own daughters, Princess Mary and the young Princess Elizabeth, of conspiring against him. These were children, yet he believed they were plotting his downfall, assigned spies to watch their every move, intercept their letters, and interrogate their servants. The little girls couldn't even trust their own tutors or maids. Dining under Henry became a battlefield in itself. His meals were treated like military campaigns. Each dish had to be tasted multiple times by different people to rule out poisoning. Food was passed down long lines of tasters before reaching his plate. Even the salt and wine were scrutinized like weapons. A single slip of wrong flavor, a strange smell could lead to execution. And all the while, Henry was falling apart from the inside. His festering leg ulcers oozed infection, making him irritable, short-tempered, and in constant pain. The smell was so putrid that courtiers struggled to remain in the same room, but nobody dared mention it. To point out the king's decay was to invite death. His moods swung wildly from laughter to rage, his mind darkened by paranoia, chronic illness, and possibly untreated head trauma from a jousting accident years earlier. He was a king at war not just with the world, but with his own shadow. When Henry VIII finally died, he didn't go quietly. By then, he was a monstrous shadow of the once powerful king, weighing over 400 pounds. He had grown so heavy and immobile that he needed mechanical devices just to be lifted from bed. His legs were ulcerated and oozing, shedding chunks of rotting flesh as servants carried him around on a pulley-lifted chair. The stench was so overpowering that some courtiers fainted. His body was grotesquely swollen, his skin stretched tight like overstuffed meat, shiny and pale, almost waxy. The royal physicians who once clamored for his attention now refused to go near him. Even his bedsheets had to be burned regularly because of the infection. And then came the infamous event. His coffin exploded. The gases building up inside his decomposing body became so intense that the lead-lined coffin burst open during the funeral procession. It wasn't just a crack or a leak, it was a putrid eruption. Royal entrails and liquefied flesh spilled out inside the hearse. The stench was unbearable. Eyewitnesses claimed the smell caused bystanders to retch on the spot. The procession had to be halted while servants scrambled to mop up the mess with rags and buckets. There are even unsettling reports that dogs stray or otherwise licked up the royal remains that had splattered onto the street. The incident was so shocking that some saw it as divine punishment for Henry's brutal reign. They even struggled to bury him. The grave at St. George's Chapel had to be widened and deepened to fit his massive reinforced coffin. Even then, the weight of it caused the ground to repeatedly collapse, and it took several attempts to secure it in place. Some workers reportedly refused to go near it, claiming the grave itself felt cursed. For years after his burial, strange rumors circulated. People spoke of eerie, groaning noises coming from his tomb, and of an inexplicable foul stench that lingered in the chapel air. Some believed it was his ghost, restless and enraged. Others suspected his decomposing body was still releasing noxious gases from deep inside the sealed crypt. Even creepier, some of the servants who handled his corpse fell mysteriously ill and died not long after. Though never officially confirmed, many suspected they had contracted infections from being exposed to the oozing rot of the king's decaying flesh. One legend claims that a pallbearer collapsed on the steps of the chapel just after lowering the coffin and died within days. Another whispered tale suggests that a chambermaid lost her sanity after glimpsing the king's body during the cleanup. In death, as in life, Henry VIII left a trail of horror behind him. Not even the grave could contain his decay, his cruelty, or his legend. He wasn't just a powerful king who changed the course of religion or married 6 different women. Henry VIII was a man consumed by ambition, by obsession, and eventually by his own decaying body. Once a striking athletic young monarch who dazzled Europe with his jousting skills and musical talent, he descended into a grotesque caricature of power. In his later years, he became monstrously obese, so heavy he had to be lifted with a mechanical hoist just to get out of bed. His leg, ulcerated and oozing, reeked so badly that courtiers could smell him from rooms away. But his physical torment was nothing compared to the darkness in his mind. Henry ruled not with wisdom, but with sheer terror. Friends, advisors, even wives, no one was safe. He executed 2 of his queens. One was accused of adultery based on flimsy, possibly fabricated evidence. Another lost her head for not bearing him a son fast enough. His paranoia reached such extremes that he once had his closest confidants tortured or killed, simply for disagreeing with him or falling out of favor. Behind the throne was a man gripped by insecurity, driven to extremes by his desperate fear of legacy and betrayal. He saw traitors in shadows and enemies in every whisper. His court was a place of fear where smiles could be masks for spies, and loyalty wasn't a shield, it was a gamble. And in the end, his story isn't one of royal glory, it's a brutal, cautionary tale. A warning about what happens when unchecked power collides with raging ego. When one man believes himself to be above God, law, and consequence. Henry VIII didn't just change history, he scarred it.